If you lost an arm, you wouldn't question whether you were still you. You'd adapt. You'd grieve the loss, maybe, but your sense of self would remain intact. But what happens when the mind begins to go? When memory thins out like fog on a cold morning? When words no longer find their way? When faces feel unfamiliar? Even the ones that raised you, loved you, held your hand. Are you still you when your own mind no longer recognizes itself? When we talk about conditions like Alzheimer's, dementia, or schizophrenia, the first thing to understand is what each word really means. Alzheimer's is a disease, a physical degeneration of the brain. Dementia is not the disease itself, but the cluster of symptoms: memory loss, confusion, difficulty with reasoning that Alzheimer's and some other conditions bring about. Schizophrenia is something else altogether, a psychiatric condition in which the way thoughts, feelings, and perceptions organize themselves becomes unstable. Hallucinations, voices, fractured self-images, this is its territory. It's at least what we have labeled it in science. These mentioned conditions are very different on the surface, but they all raise the same deeper question. If the mind does not function in the way we are used to, is the light of awareness still present? This is not an abstract question. Families who sit with a parent or a partner in the fog of dementia often wonder, is the person I love still in there? If my father no longer remembers my name, if my mother looks right at me but does not recognize who I am, has her consciousness gone? Or is it still present but unable to show itself through thought and language? We can accept easily that if you lose the sense of smell, you are still you. But what if what is lost is memory, speech, or coherent thinking? Does the you that is conscious awareness survive the collapse of the mental instrument? The only instrument we have at our hands to be conscious of our reality. From the point of view of non-duality, the answer is radical. The mind is not the self. It never was. The mind is like a tool, a shifting pattern of thoughts and memories that comes and goes, while awareness itself does not flicker. The mistake is to assume that when the tool is broken, the awareness that is expressed through it is gone. That assumption belongs to our culture, which tends to equate the brain with awareness, but it is not the actual experience. When we're born, we don't have a built-up sense of self, no history, no name, no personal beliefs, and yet we're fully here, breathing, feeling, sensing. That baby isn't thinking, I am, but awareness is already present. The aliveness is undeniable even if it has no words yet. What we call consciousness, the stream of thoughts, memories, preferences, opinions, comes later. It's learned, constructed, and that's fine. It's how we function, but we mistake that structure for who we are. Awareness is something different. It's not built from experience. It's what experience appears within. It doesn't remember or plan. It just knows, effortlessly. So when consciousness in the everyday sense starts to erode through dementia or mental illness, it can feel like the person is disappearing. But the deeper presence that was there before they had a name is still here now, just quieter, just wordless. Consider a simple analogy. Imagine a radio that begins to malfunction. The signal is still being broadcast, the music is still there in the air, but the speaker distorts the sound, cuts in and out, and sometimes emits only static. Do we say the music has disappeared? No, we say the radio cannot receive and transmit it properly. Dementia, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, these can be seen as radios with broken parts. The awareness, the living broadcast, is not gone. the instrument simply cannot deliver it in the way we expect. Families often struggle because they see no outward recognition. A son speaks to his mother and she stares blankly. A husband sits with his wife and she tells stories that make no sense, or insists she sees things no one else sees. But behind the confusion, the awareness is untouched. What is lost are the faculties of expression, speech, memory, coherent logic. What remains is the ever-present being, which cannot vanish because it was never created by the brain in the first place. To make this more relatable, think about dreaming. Every night you lie down in bed, motionless and expressionless. Your body does not move, your face gives nothing away. But in the dream there is a whole world, conversations, landscapes, events. You are living it vividly, even though no one outside can see it. In the same way, a person in dementia may appear blank, but that does not mean consciousness is absent. They may be immersed in an inner reality we cannot access. Even if that inner reality becomes fragmented, awareness itself is never fragmented. This perspective can be a comfort. When we stop equating the person with the mind, we stop imagining that a loved one is vanishing when the mind falters. The awareness that was present when they laughed with us, remembered us, spoke with us, is still present. It does not depend on memory to exist. It is like the space in a house. When the walls are torn down, the space does not vanish. It was never confined in the first place. At this point, someone may ask, but if the person cannot recognize me, what is the value of saying awareness is still there? The value is that we are no longer looking for confirmation through the mind. We can rest in the quiet recognition that what we love in them is not the swirling bundle of memories, but the very being that is aware. That being is still here, even if the instrument of the brain no longer transmits it in familiar ways. This also sheds light on schizophrenia. When someone hears voices or believes they are multiple people, what is really breaking down is the mental structure that organizes identity. It is chaotic and often painful, but from the non-dual view, it is not proof that awareness is damaged. In fact, it can be seen as exposing the fiction of the coherent personal self. The mind stories splinter, and while this is usually experienced as suffering, it also shows that the I we thought was solid was only ever a construction. Behind the broken stories, the awareness remains the same. This first layer of understanding, that awareness is not the mind, already begins to loosen the fear. We begin to see that Alzheimer's is not a thief of the self. Dementia does not erase being. Schizophrenia does not fracture awareness. These conditions affect the instrument, not the light shining through it. And if the light is not touched, then the essence of our loved ones is still here, present, even if unreachable through words and memory. When we look honestly at Alzheimer's, dementia, or schizophrenia, what strikes us most is not some mystical beauty, but the raw reality of decline and disruption. Let's be clear about this. There is nothing glamorous in watching someone you love forget your name, wander confused through familiar rooms, or suffer under frightening hallucinations. This is hard, it is exhausting, and it often feels cruel. To pretend otherwise would be dishonest. And yet in the very starkness of these conditions, something becomes visible that is usually hidden by the smooth functioning of the mind. We normally assume that the mind is who we are. We say, I think, therefore I am. But when the mind becomes disorganized, scattered, or lost, the illusion that it was our true identity begins to collapse. That collapse is painful, but it is also revealing. It shows with merciless clarity that the mind is not a reliable foundation for who we are. If your sense of self rests on memory, on the continuity of stories, then dementia tears that foundation away. If your sense of self rests on the consistency of thought, then schizophrenia shows how fragile that consistency really is. In both cases, what is left shining through is the simple fact of being. The awareness itself does not come and go with the conditions of thought. This does not mean that these illnesses are a gift, or that we should wish them upon anyone. They are brutal. But they are also undeniable demonstrations that the mind is not the self. If we learn that lesson while healthy, the suffering that comes when the mind falters can be met with a deeper compassion. We stop confusing the breakdown of thought with the loss of the person's essence. But this raises another important question. If someone cannot perform inquiry, cannot meditate, cannot follow structured spiritual practices because their faculties are impaired, is awakening still possible? Can there be recognition of awareness when the mind is fractured? The usual way we talk about realization is through practices that involve a functioning mind, turning attention inward, asking, "Who am I?" sitting in silence, reflecting on teachings. But if those tools are unavailable, does that mean the truth is unavailable? Here is where the nature of awakening itself becomes crucial. Awakening is not an achievement of the mind. It is not a result produced by thought. It is the recognition of what has always been here before thought. It is not owned by the mind, so it does not depend on the mind being intact. If realization were a mental accomplishment, it would be destroyed the moment the mind deteriorated. But countless sages have pointed out that the recognition of being is prior to mind and independent of it. So yes, awakening, if we want to call it that, is still possible even when the mind is compromised. It may not look like a neat philosophical clarity expressed in eloquent sentences. It may not look like a seeker reporting insights. But the simple resting as awareness, the being that is present before words, is untouched. A person with dementia may not be able to say, "I am not the body, I am not the mind," but the truth of being remains, regardless of whether it is spoken or understood in conceptual terms. There are even accounts of people with severe mental illness who, despite chaotic thought streams, still radiated a quiet presence. The mind kept playing its games, but there was no ownership of the chaos. The thoughts rushed like broken glass in a river, but the water of awareness flowed untouched. This shows that realization is not something the mind achieves. It is a recognition that dawns regardless of the condition of thought. For caregivers and loved ones, this matters. It means that the person you care for is not vanishing into nothingness when their words and memories fall apart. They remain as the same awareness you have always known, even if the surface layers no longer reflect it back. And for those facing these conditions themselves, it means comfort. Your essence does not erode with your neurons. The fear that I will be gone when my memory is gone rests on the mistaken belief that memory is who you are. The breakdown of the mind demonstrates, sometimes violently, that you are more than thought. So these conditions, while tragic, also carry a kind of testimony. They testify to the fragility of the mind and the endurance of being. They remind us without any romance that what we are cannot be destroyed by the erosion of brain tissue or the fracture of thought patterns. If you stop for a moment and look at your own mind right now, you'll see how slippery it is. In the morning, you can wake up full of enthusiasm about a new plan, and by evening, you're convinced it's pointless. One day you feel sure of yourself, the next day you're flooded with self-doubt. Voices in the head is a phrase we often reserve for schizophrenia, but if we're honest, We all have different voices passing through. An inner critic, a cheerleader, a warrior, a planner, all these characters parade through without warning. The content shifts constantly. The tone contradicts itself. In 1 hour, the mind can present you as a hero, a failure, a lover, a victim, a genius, an idiot. This isn't schizophrenia. This is the ordinary mind doing what it does. And yet most of us still cling to the idea that this moving parade is who we are. These conditions, Alzheimer's, dementia, schizophrenia, throw a harsh light on the parade. They make its fragility obvious, but you don't have to wait for illness to see the same lesson. You can see it right now. If the mind can contradict itself so easily, if it can produce completely different stories about me from one moment to the next, how can it be the stable core of who you are? You can't be what constantly changes. See this, now. This is why the insight behind awakening doesn't belong to mystics or sick people or healthy people. It's the recognition that the only part of experience that is always present is the knowing of it. Thoughts change, feelings change, memory changes, identity stories change, but the simple fact of being aware does not change. You don't wake up one morning as someone else's awareness. The witnessing presence that saw yesterday's thoughts is the same presence seeing today's. It isn't more enthusiastic in the morning and more depressed in the evening. It doesn't become fragmented when the mind does. It's the silent background to all the noise. Seen from here, the difference between a so-called normal mind and a mind in dementia or schizophrenia is only in the content, not in the awareness that knows the content. The content may be a neat, consistent narrative or a jumbled, chaotic mess. The awareness is the same. This isn't an idea to be believed. It's something you can notice directly. Right now, notice that your mind is full of impressions, judgments, sensations, half-formed words. All of them come and go, but the simple fact of being aware of them is steady. That steady being is what you are. This is why the question of awakening in the midst of mental illness can be answered with a quiet yes. Awakening isn't the mind achieving a special state. It's the seeing of what's already here, the change of identity from the unreliable parade to the unchanging presence that watches it. Someone with a fractured mind may never express this recognition in neat sentences, but the recognition itself does not depend on neat sentences. It's pre-verbal, it's before thought. For families, this can bring a measure of peace. When you sit with a parent who no longer knows your name, you can meet them not at the level of memory, but at the level of being. A gentle touch, a look, a moment of shared stillness, these reach the awareness that is still there. You don't have to pretend the suffering isn't real. It is real. It's exhausting and heartbreaking. Yes, the person, as you knew them, is vanishing. The role they played, the way they spoke, the shared jokes, the look in their eyes, all of that fades. But what remains is not the person, it's their being. What you loved was never their memory. It was their living presence. That presence remains. And for those who fear their own decline, there is solace. The essence of who you are does not erode with your neurons. The mind may forget everything. The awareness of forgetting cannot be forgotten. The mind may tell contradictory stories. The awareness of those stories doesn't contradict itself. If you want to see this for yourself, you don't need a disease, and you don't even need a formal practice. Right now, notice your mind. Notice how it talks, how it judges, how it flips from one mood to another. Notice that you are not inside those flips. You are the one aware of them. That's the same awareness that will still be present if the mind someday becomes cloudy. That's the same awareness present in every being you meet, even when their mind is clouded today. If you feel drawn to move beyond just understanding these ideas intellectually, to actually seeing for yourself what you are, we've put together a more structured path in the form of a digital retreat. It's designed to take you from surface-level insight into a deeper, lived recognition of your true nature, through a mix of direct teachings and guided meditations. There's also a free guided self-inquiry on the channel, which might already be all you need. You'll find everything linked in the description below,